Well, our next guest knows how to deliver a zinger. He doesn't get enough platforms from which to deliver them. He was very popular the last time he was on here on the mother of all talk shows, and I'm very glad to welcome back Dr. John Campbell, who must be feeling, Doctor, somewhat vindicated by the way the current reportage, at least in certain quarters, of the whole lockdown, the whole way in which the government handled all of this last period is beginning to fall apart, it's beginning to tumble, isn't it?
Good to see you, George. It's been too long, just over 2 years, I think, since we talked last time. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see you. And I thought it was right because I think you have been vindicated.
You know, I started off really trusting the official narrative. We thought that the government had our best interest at heart. We thought they were actually using the science. We thought they were basing things on scientific decisions, on empirical knowledge. And it looked pretty good. And at the beginning, there was nothing really to contradict that official narrative. But as time has gone on, it's become more and more obvious that this official narrative is basically full of holes. The whole pro-vaccine narrative. Now, on YouTube, of course, I'm not allowed to say too much about vaccines, but where was all the talk about natural immunity? Where was all the talk about vitamin D and zinc and promoting health with good diet and losing weight and all the other things that we know that are massively efficacious? Why was all the focus just on interventions that all seem to be remarkably expensive? Why was it that alternative therapies that could be useful, again, we're not really even allowed to talk about those, but why weren't they fully investigated? Why didn't the government sponsor clinical trials looking at these alternative therapies until it was basically too late? And why didn't they take into account that the risk-benefit analysis changed dramatically? Thinking about vaccination, the risk of vaccination has been much the same throughout this pandemic. There's certain risks associated with it that we know about. But the danger from the disease went down so dramatically at the time of Omicron. Why did policies not change when that risk-benefit analysis changed? And you're absolutely right. Information is coming out now. So we've got the new exposés, for example, these lockdown files from the Daily Telegraph that are dripping out revelations day after day. And to be quite honest, the people in charge aren't really coming out of this smelling of roses, George.
No, on the contrary, they're smelling of something far more foul. And you know, I know all these people. I've been up close and personal with them. I never imagined they were James Bonds, but I never thought they were the kind of fools that they seem now to be from at least their WhatsApp messages.
There's certainly some good WhatsApp messages, isn't there? The thing that's disappointed me mostly is politicians seem to be reverting to type. So a lot of what the politicians were saying seems to be how they're going to look after their interests, how the stories are going to project, how the stories are going to play out. And you could almost say that this sometimes outweighed their thinking about the actual efficacy and the benefit of what was going to happen. And the other thing is, why were they so dependent on particular committees, like the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority, for example, which we now know is over 80% funded by industry? Where was the independent analysis of this? Why were independent academics often ostracized? You know, we've got some absolutely brilliant academics in this country, George. All we've got to do is throw the data at them and they'll crunch it. You know, people I've been working with like Norman Fenton are world-class statisticians. Give him the numbers, he'll run them into his spreadsheet and come out with real answers. But we're not allowed the empirical data to work with. Just take one example, the original trials that were done for the Pfizer and the Moderna mRNA vaccines. The original participant level data for that still has not been released. It's not in the public domain yet. Why have they not released that data? That data's there. We believe Pfizer has it. We believe Moderna has it. We believe the FDA in the United States also has it. Well, release it. Norman Fenton can do a spreadsheet analysis on it. We can talk to Asim Malhotra about it, and then I can make a YouTube video about it. But we're just not getting the information we want. Why is there this lack of transparency? It's been one of the themes that's really emerged for me. Let's just have open transparency, give us the data, we can analyze it, make sense of it, and draw our own conclusions, thank you very much, rather than being forced to accept the official narrative all of the time. Very disappointing, really.
Well, this is the point about censorship, as explained by that well-known revolutionary John Stuart Mill. He said that by censoring people, we are harming ourselves, because the person we are censoring and depriving of liberty may be saying things that are or are in part true. And by not hearing them, we're harming not him, but ourselves. This is the whole point, isn't it?
Absolutely. We need to take into account all opinions. Now, some opinions we can look at, and they can be dismissed at a fairly early stage if they contradict some fundamental scientific principle or some fundamental ethical, moral principle. Other opinions are going to take a little bit longer for us to analyse. But we have to hear these opinions in the first place so we know how to treat them and we know how to proceed. And the wise man who forgets to listen to the fool can cease to become wise, which I think is another way of saying what you've just said. So let's take these opinions. Let's get rid of this censorship. Let's take the opinions on board. Let's analyse them. And then let's come to some conclusions based on everyone's contribution, because it's not just ordinary people that have been excluded from this conversation. It's really people that know a heck of a lot of what they're talking about. So I've talked to world experts around the world. So, for example, the fact that we're doing the injections in the UK at the moment for vaccines, we're not doing it properly, in my view. We're sticking the needle in and we're not drawing back to make sure we're not in a blood vessel. Well, I've talked to world-leading scientists around the world who actually say that this should be being done. This is not necessarily minority opinions. This is actual proper scientists, proper consultants, well-published scientists. And yet, if it doesn't fit into a particular narrative, we're not really hearing what they say. And that is disappointing. We're missing out on one heck of a lot of good stuff by sticking so meticulously to a single narrative.
Yeah, especially when we can see from the WhatsApp messages that many of these people are not exactly superstars intellectually. And yet they constituted the prevailing orthodoxy. And I've quoted John Stuart Mill. Let me quote an even bigger reactionary, the great English man of letters, Dr. Johnson, who said, "The grimmest dictatorship is the dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy." And we've lost out by having to bow to that prevailing orthodoxy, haven't we, Doctor?
I think we have, and I couldn't agree with you more about, shall we say, the intellectual challenge of some of the people that are governing us. But it's not necessarily a pure lack of intellect, although in certain cases I suspect the lack of intellect is there. Maybe people got there for other reasons other than their own pure merit. But one of the things I've had a problem with for a long time is a lot of people in Parliament, for example, tend to be professions, shall we say, other than doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and scientists. I mean, I've never actually done a survey on this, but how many people in Parliament have actually got science degrees? How many people in Cabinet have got science degrees? Very, very few.
Not many, really not many. Not many. You'll be lucky if it's 10%.
I think it probably wouldn't even be that. So while these people might be brilliant barristers, seems to be quite a popular profession, for example, very good analytical skills, but you need some basic material to facilitate that analysis, and you need a basic understanding of science. So I've talked to brilliant people in different walks of life who actually understand some scientific principles at the most fundamental level, or aspects of healthcare at the most fundamental level. So I think we need a much more eclectic group of people who are actually taking these decisions, rather than people who are drawn from a fairly narrow legal Oxbridge sort of past tradition, in favour of nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, people that have actually been at the coal face and got their hands dirty and smelt what it smells like to work in healthcare.
So where does this story go from here, Doctor? Let me finally quote Shakespeare. Are we steeped in blood so far that is it bloodier to go on or go our? Do we double down? Do we keep on insisting that we were right? Or is the way that we handled all these lockdowns going to be properly investigated in this public inquiry?
Yeah, I mean, can you name some public inquiries that have actually got to the core of the matter, have got to the core of the truth? I mean, if you think about the public inquiry into the Iraq war, I mean, dear me, you know, I just couldn't stand watching it after a period of time.
It took 10 years. It took 10 years.
Yeah, and still no one's in prison after all of that.
No.
Public inquiries, it's probably slightly better than nothing. You know, I really feel we're at a bit of a fork at the moment, George. I think it could go one of two ways. I think the way that media has been democratized to an extent. So you and me can go onto YouTube at the moment. We can make Rumble videos. And that's actually getting quite a lot of fresh information out, which is great. If that can continue, and we can have meritocratic presenters who can make a rational argument, who can get away from this BBC stereotypical narrative, that way could bring us quite a lot of freedom. Joe Rogan, for example, has achieved it to quite a large extent. So that is, you might not agree with everything he said, but that's encouraging. So that's one possibility. The other is a little more darker, and that is that governments carry on their collusion with big tech, which we assume is there to a degree, and actually close things down even further. So I suspect in sort of 5 or 10 years' time, things could be a lot better if we carry on with this democratization of opinion and democratization of news. But if certain vested interests are able to control different aspects of the media, especially the popular media that's available now, like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, all these things. If they can get control of those, then I think free speech is pretty well, certainly it will continue its downward trajectory. But if these things can be liberated and democratized and emancipated, then the future of free speech is looking much more promising. I'm just really hoping it goes in that positive direction.